Hey, sorry, just getting comfortable.
Why are your guys' shirts both so wrinkly?
Dude.
I I have children.
Oh, Gary.
Is that the style?
I put mine in the dryer
I
too.
really did try.
I did try.
I literally had I saw it and I went, uh-oh, I need to go find a,
Since both of you have I was just like, oh, I guess I've not seen this trend.
No, this is called. We were out of town this weekend, and then
this is called I just got back into Colorado yesterday.
and did laundry, and
Okay.
laundry has not been put away
Well,
yet.
I like it. I'm going to ask my wife just to let my clothes dry in the washing machine.
We find that we're on the cutting edge of
It's innovation. It's really what it
trend.
is.
Well, I know. That's why I wanted to talk to you guys. Yeah, let's get started. Let's just introduce ourselves. I'm Gary. I'm part of the communications team. I live in Tulsa, so I work remotely with these two guys. And Chase, why don't you tell us about yourself?
My name is Chase. I live here in the Denver area. I get to serve on our team as an account manager. So what I get to do is, kind of first touch point with our clients, with churches, get to dive into who they are as a ministry, what their mission, what their vision, what their impact is, try to understand who they are, how they operate, and then I get to take that information and share it with the rest of our team.
Where were you at before you came to Summit?
I spent 10 years before coming to Summit at a church in Fresno, California, leading kind of creative arts and our worship experience and worship. Sat on our kind of central leadership team, and just had a great time with them. Cutting records, doing services and gatherings, launching campuses, all that fun stuff.
Awesome. John, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, my name's John. I also serve our team as an account manager or client relations, depending on how long people have used to working with Summit. It's been called both. I came from Red Rocks Church. I served there for about 10 years as the production director and some other things. And happy to be here chatting about weekend experience and service planning.
Yeah, so I wanted to get you guys together because you kind of are from different departments, as you would say, at least your background from the production and the worship team. And I just wanted to get both of your perspectives on how churches could plan services better, like especially like a Christmas or an Easter, stuff that are like typically a little more goes into it, but even just the week to week grind. When you guys consider that, what's some of the best advice that you would give to a church on possibly just even creating unity between the production and worship teams? And that planning process?
I think the why is really, really important for churches to consider because oftentimes we get to a Christmas or an Easter and it's like we have these big, like, okay, we want to do this and this and this and this, but have we, when was the last time we zoomed out and thought, well, why? Because for a lot of churches, it is doing the bigger, better kind of thing, ramping it up for Christmas or Easter. And for a lot of churches, and there's purpose in that, but there's also a lot of churches out there that have sort of landed on the, well, look, this is when we're going to have the most amount of people ever, throughout the course of a year attending our church. Why would we be something that we're not?
That's good.
For the one service, these two services a year. It's like the one time that we decide to be something that we're not. So, but yet there's truth on both sides of that. And I think just threading the needle there of what really is the why for this? What are we trying to accomplish, and work backwards? Otherwise you can let the wrong thing drive the conversation. And ultimately I don't know that that's actually the best for the church.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so easy to, if you're browsing through YouTube or browsing through Instagram or socials to get these creative ideas for these creative gatherings, it's easy to play the comparison game. You kind of forget who you are and what the church identity is. And, Scripture talks a lot about how we all have kind of unique gifts and skill sets, and just like a body, like my right arm is different from my left arm, and so on, and we all serve these kind of different purposes. And I think it's important to stay true to who you are, plan a service around who you are, what your mission, what your vision is for the community that you serve. But also I think it's important that you stick to that, because then when folks come back the week after, they're not like, this is a completely different church,
Yeah. So it's like, what's the right amount of elevating?
Yeah.
What's the right amount of kind of like dressing it up a little bit?
Yeah.
And for some churches, sometimes they find that it's the opposite. It's like, oh man, for this Christmas, we're stripping it back.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think there's a lot of planning just from a weekend experience team in general that can go on to really make sure that everyone's aligned in what that is. Otherwise, what you have is maybe it's the production team that wants to do something like incredible and way out here, but the worship team doesn't, or vice versa. The production team's like, dude, I'm so sick of renting things in or doing the big thing, while the worship team's like, let's go.
Yeah.
So I think a synergy there is important. And oftentimes I find that we can really get to a great place just simply with bringing the teams together.
Yeah.
So like, how would you execute that?
I mean, it starts in the office. And so it starts in investing in the relationships you have within the office before then you try to go and execute big ideas or big plans. And so if I'm not invested in John's life, if I don't know, his wife's name, his kid's name, maybe what's going on in his life personally, when I come to him as a worship guy and I say, hey man, I've got this grandiose idea and I'd love for your team to, pull it off. And he's going to go, well, dude, you don't know what's on my plate right now. You don't know what's going on in my life. You may not know all these other factors that may contribute to how I show up to, you asking me to, or my team to pull this off. And so I think, practically just making sure that you are connected, to your teams, whether that's the specific team that you oversee or a specific team that you serve on, or a team that you kind of work in tandem with to pull off these services or these gatherings. Make sure you're carving time out of your day to have conversation that isn't around work. Go grab lunch together, go grab coffee together, ask intentional questions and get involved in the lives of the folks that you're working with. That way there's that foundation built so that when a big ask or a large gathering or some sort of large special event comes along, you've got kind of that equity, that relational equity to spend, as opposed to just showing up and demanding something every time.
Yeah, I think spending time in the creative part of the process is important. I think a lot of people, production, creative, worship, whatever table they kind of sit at, it's very common. This isn't just tech or whatever. I mean, I see this across the board. It's very common in a creative type of environment where we're talking about ideas. It's very common to immediately jump into like, okay, but how are we going to pull it off? Do we have the money to pull that off? And it is true. There is such thing as dreaming dreams in a meeting that are just well beyond what is actually possible. But I think to answer your question, Gary, it really comes back to having have conversations with with the leadership team, your lead pastor, and like really hone in, what are we actually doing here? And when you can keep that vision as the central piece of the entire planning, it's a little bit easier to stay on track and not get too sidetracked. And then when you are having sort of creative dreaming types of meetings, you can sit there and just for fun go, yeah, what if?
Yeah.
And then from there, distill it down even further.
Yeah. I love that too, because then it makes it more about beating the idea than it does about beating the person.
Yeah.
And so in these collaborative, creative environments, it doesn't become my idea or Chase versus John or John versus Chase. We're fighting for the best idea, not necessarily the best defense, if you will. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Invest in the relationships. Like the best way to plan a weekend service is to build a unity through relationships. At least that's the best way to start it. What's some other, what would you guys say is the biggest tension between trying to pull off a weekend service with production and worship?
A common tension is just a literal divide in the auditorium, where it's like the stage and then the tech people, and it can often feel like just two fundamentally different worlds. The problems are different because there are problems on both sides of that. A lot of production people will think that, like, man, they have no idea the challenges of technology that we're facing. But on the flip side of that, you don't have to go stand on a stage in front of a lot of people every week and pour your heart out and lead people in worship. There's challenges on either side of that. And so I think seeing the challenges for what they are and having an element of grace and understanding for what the other person is dealing with is ultimately the thing. And I really just think that's just Jesus.
Yeah.
That's just the gospel. That's what we should be as a church, as the body of Christ.
Yeah.
But I think it gets lost in the performance of, man, well, I just have a job to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked with a production director in the past who used to say, all these crazy requests would come to him for various reasons, not even just Christmas or Easter gatherings. And he'd be like, oh yeah, there's totally just a button for that. And that was like this way of like acknowledging like, yeah, I got it and I'll figure it out. But also deep down inside, he's like, that's not just a button. That's a whole, tons of layers of complexity. Yeah. I think
that's good.
Kind of one of the tensions to manage in the midst of that too is going back to what we said earlier, is just staying true to who you are as a church. And so there is that temptation to want to go bigger than what you normally are, or portray something that you typically aren't, like almost like this imposter syndrome type of thing, because sometimes there is a little bit extra budget for these more creative gatherings. So you've got an opportunity to rent more lights, you've got an opportunity to pull off some different music or whatever it may be, and then it's easy to kind of fall into this trap of like, actually resources help serve the creative process, as opposed to, actually, I think it's the other way around. Lack of resources usually drives that creativity. So I think the line to ride in the midst of that is, just stay true to who you are. You have an opportunity, as you said earlier, to just present the gospel well, an opportunity in a, Christmas service or an Easter service where chances are people are going to show up to your church, completely like uninvited. They're just going to go because they think it's the right thing to do during that time. So it's like this one time a year where you really don't have to market yourself as a church.
People are just
creasters, baby. They're just going to come.
And Easter.
They're just going to come either way. And you can usually pick out who they are because they're dressed completely different. They show up early, but there's another thing in that too, is like, as a leader, when you see those folks that you don't recognize in your church, whether it's a big church or a small church, usually it's the folks on a Christmas or an Easter who show up early and are usually dressed a little bit nicer. Go engage with them, go interact with them, because those are the folks that may or may not come back next weekend, and let's make an impression. Bringing it back to it. Just staying true to who you are as a church, understanding what your reach is, what your community needs are, and maybe even stepping back and asking the questions when you're creating these services of going, hey, if we didn't do a Christmas or an Easter gathering this year, what would our community miss? Or if we weren't if we weren't here this Sunday, without our presence, what would the community miss? And so identifying some of those key things, and then lean into those.
Yeah. I'm also a fan of a couple things. One, of telling a story throughout a service. Like I think that oftentimes that's not really looked at. It's like, well, we just do the thing. We do this song, we do this thing. As opposed to, man, can we even just be intentional with the story? Maybe you have an awesome creative video team, or you're filming some special things before the service that you're going to kind of use as service elements. Just a general like story arc.
Yeah.
Is ultimately, there's a lot of value in that.
What's like the perfect example that a season that you were able to pull off the perfect service? What did that look like?
Yeah, I'm a fan of if there are creative elements, like, man, maybe the first song tees up perfectly into a story that we're showing that's going to roll with a video, that maybe it's an Easter or where it's telling the story in a new and fresh way, and then the worship is synced up with it, and then right at the end of it, they're going into something else that's teed up right from that goes into an announcement block that isn't just an announcement block. Yeah. That person is actually sort of ramping on that. It's like when everything just feels intentional throughout the course of a service, rather than just like the canned thing.
Yeah. What I heard you saying is that there's some sort of C note within the whole thing, where I think it's easy in these larger gathering environments to kind of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. To where you're like, hey, we've got this one chance or maybe two chances a year where all these people are going to be in our room. All these people are going to be, watching online. And so we just want to feed them everything. So then your service becomes a variety show, like a carnival, versus this beautiful narrative with a C note. And so I think, that's good. I think that's super important. And I think that's where those conversations of like, hey, let's fight for the best idea in the room, not fight for preferences or any of that stuff. Like let's fight for the idea. Mm-hmm. Let's have a common C note. Let's make sure we're communicating exactly what we want to communicate. Let's get in and out. I don't think we need to drag anything out, for too long. And just realize that you have people's attention for an hour to an hour and a half, depending on how long your service usually goes. Be really intentional with that. Like time's valuable. And so be mindful of that and be intentional with the small window of time that you have people's attention.
I also think get outside the box a little bit. I would say, even just the normal, like I know a couple churches that have done something rather than pouring a ton of energy into the weekend experience for a Christmas. They sort of used all of their efforts on, we're doing like a light show or some kind of, Christmas light, like this, not even throughout the entire month of December or whatever it is, where, it's an outreach essentially, where families are like, get to walk their kids through, or they get to do some kind of like just getting people into your church, or even if they're just sitting in cars watching some kind of show. Like ultimately our goal as the church is to reach people and reach the local community. And that doesn't always have to look like a weekend experience during the holiday Christmas season. And so I think that's also an underutilized thing. A lot of churches just focus solely on the weekend experience, which is valuable, but also are there other things that you're maybe not taking advantage of through that season?
Yeah, I think one of our most impactful Christmas services was actually during COVID, where, we didn't even host an in-person gathering. We created content that equipped moms and dads to be spiritual leaders in their homes. And so there was almost like this, we had like a little book to go with it. We had a really well put together gathering. We recorded a little Christmas album to kind of go along with it. And so we packaged all that up nicely digitally and was able to send that out to, the folks within our church and allow them to be the senior pastor, allow them to be the teacher, as opposed to, all right, everybody put on your Christmas best and let's show up to church, let's sing a couple songs. Let's, hear this story and go home and then have Christmas meal.
And it doesn't have to fly in the face of that. It's like both of those things are important.
Totally.
And ultimately that's the goal. It's not one or the other. It's just where do we put our time and energy into? How can we accomplish both?
No, absolutely.
I love what you're saying.
Yeah. Love that.
So, we've got vision, we've got unity, relationship. What does, now let's go some nuts and bolts here. What does your ideal, we'll just start with a Christmas, a big service. What does your ideal, planning months out from Christmas look like?
This is a trick question for me because sometimes we're on it and we're planning in the summer. Other times we've just kind of found that, keeping the important things important, we'll kind of start planning in December.
I've planned my fair share of Christmas services in December.
Yeah. So I don't know if I could say, what I've had the most success with. I think the important thing is having the idea, at least in the front of your mind, bringing the right people into the right room for the right reason, and just starting a conversation and seeing what happens. There's been times when we've done that and we've walked out with knowing exactly what we were going to do. There's times where those meetings felt exhausting, and so the next year I didn't do any of them. Yeah. And we just decided, like, you know what? Hey, we got Christmas in a couple weeks. We were typically, the teams that I served on, we were typically 3 weeks in advance planning. And so that was from scheduling volunteers to, resources and assets that we needed for the gathering itself.
Is that just every service 3 weeks, or?
My type A personality, yes, it was every service was typically 3 weeks planned. But I think some of the best ideas that we've had just kind of come out of like, hey, we're not trying to force anything. We're just trying to be natural about it. And it comes out of an overflow of even kind of what the Lord's been doing in our own personal lives. And you just can't force that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I would just say figure out what works for you and roll with that.
And it can be different every year. Like, it's not like, all right, every year, August.
Yeah.
Let's sit down and try and plan Christmas.
Well, and I think it's important to realize too that like deadlines trigger process.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a Christmas Eve service, or I think this year Sunday falls on the 22nd, like set a deadline and then kind of allow the process, that to trigger the process. But no, man, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. There's a little bit of both and there. And I just think that it really is what's best for the church. And I think a great takeaway, if people took anything away from this, is just, it's okay if your process or your thing looks a little bit different. There's no right way. It's not like, oh man, you have to follow X, Y, and Z. And then the answer is somehow your perfect Christmas service. Some churches are going to be wildly different for Christmas, and they have vision and mission and purpose for that. And some churches are going to be really pretty similar to who they are. And they're also going to have mission and vision and purpose for that. Neither one is wrong. But the sooner that you sort of identify, who are we? Why are we doing this? Where are we going? What's the point of this?
Yeah.
And attack it head on. I think ultimately that's when things come together.
Well, thanks for not answering my question.
You're welcome, Gary. That's my favorite thing to do.
No, that's good. That's, I think people want nuts and bolts, like what is the process, so that I can it's all prescriptive. And I don't think that's true. So your guys' answers is helpful to know. I can try to plan it like they planned it, but it probably is not going to work for the people that I'm working with, because I don't have the same team they have. And we don't have the same budget or the same time frame and all that kind of stuff.
And sometimes it's even a waste of time too. Like, sometimes overly planning something is in some ways just stressing people out, because they're like, man, this thing's a huge deal. Like, it's got to go. But if there isn't enough resources, or if there isn't a production value of that specific church to accomplish that specific style of planning, then that even could be off base in and of itself. Yeah. So it's hard to prescribe one specific way of doing it. But I've seen everything from churches literally in the summer, or before the summer, going through and every tiny little detail. This is song one. This is exactly what's happening. I mean, you have film teams going out and filming stuff way in advance, and that I've even seen some churches go a year, where it's like, hey man, next Christmas, January hits, and they're already while things are snowy outside, they're like, all right, we're already filming stuff for next Christmas. Yeah. So there's, and that works for them. It's not wrong. It's just not always the right thing for every church. And so that's where I have a little apprehension of, this is the one right way to plan a Christmas service.
What's one question you wish people asked you when it comes to planning and leading your respective teams?
for me, it's how to care well for your volunteers in this season.
That's good.
I think it's so easily, we as staff members are spoiled because we get to spend 40 hours a week working on things or practicing music or planning. But the reality is those who are serving on our teams, they have families, they have careers, they've got hobbies. And then on top of that, they're also trying to serve their church as well. And so I think it's really, really important, to make sure that we're pouring into you, both from an appreciation side, but also just in a discipleship side, to those team members who we're asking a ton of. Yeah. And so maybe it's not your culture, to pay people, for serving on a weekend. But maybe you can find some money in your budget to, shoot the small amount of money over to your team, for serving for Christmas or Easter or whatever it may be. If that's not in the cards, then honestly, your time is so valuable. And so spend time with your folks and ask them how their Christmas season's going, their holiday season. Ask them ask them what's on their Christmas. Just spend time with them. Yeah. Invest in them, disciple them, equip them. Just be involved in their lives, because the reality is they're serving the church, yes, but they're doing that on top of everything else that's on their plate. And so I think we as leaders need to be mindful of that, that these guys aren't getting paid, 40 hours a week to do this, that this comes out of an overflow. And so invest in their heart so that there is residual in the overflow.
And you'll have to find out what that is for each person is going to be different on your team. And so to some people, it might be getting them a Target Visa gift card. Yep. And to other people, they might not care at all about that. But a gift is going to go further. And you can't go down the trail of, depends on how large teams are. You're not always going to be able to win at that game, but putting care into your people during Christmas and Easter.
Host a team night. You know what I mean? Like, go
throw some bags around.
Exactly. And invite their family into the process too. Yeah. Because I think it's important for us to recognize that those folks that serve, their families, their kids, their spouses serve at just as high of a level when, dad's not there or mom's not there. And so invite their families into the process as well. If you have the resources, on your team, like I said, host a team night, provide a nice dinner for, your person who's serving and their spouse, and then, have childcare as well. Rally up your kids team, to provide some free childcare for that night. Find any reason for them to, say no and squash that.
What was the average amount of team nights that you guys would do?
We would try to typically do 3 to 4 a year.
Yeah, like quarterly.
Typically quarterly. And that was anywhere between spending time to equip, but also spending time to reinvest and appreciate. So we can't always make it about, hey, what can we get out of you, or what can we pour into you? Sometimes we just want to push pause and just say thank you for you. Mm-hmm. So we would kind of ride that line between 3 to 4. And usually Christmas was a big time. Yeah.
John, what about you? What's the one question that you wish people would ask you?
Man, it's hard to answer. I'm loving the Proverbs. It says a fool is wise in his own eyes, but a wise man seeks understanding from others. And I think very often I wish, this maybe isn't even a question, but I guess what I'm saying is I wish that worship and production people would try and look through the lens of other people's eyes. And so even the concept of a soapbox, it's like, man, I want to spend more time getting off mine and listening to what other people have to say. And so I think that's just a general, that goes well beyond Christmas and Easter, but that's just a general thing to me. Like, man, if we could just listen to each other a little bit more, and care for each other a little bit more, I think that the capital C church would be a better place.
Yeah. So great stuff. All right, guys, thanks for chatting and imparting your wisdom.